All right, we are live today. My name is Abhijit Verkar. I'm the founder and CEO at Avero. And with me, I have my project management team, part of it. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Robert?
Robert Kranovich, Director of Advisory Services here at Avero.
Katie Knatzer, Senior Project Manager.
Ross DeFal, Project Manager.
Okay, so this, it looks like a hastily put together studio because it is, and it's urgent that we bring this information to you. We've been seeing a lot of RFPs for ERP systems specifically with government agencies that are in our prospect pool or our clients even that they've put out that haven't been thought through. And I wanted to bring this team together to just talk about why that's a mistake, why you need to rethink your ERP RFPs, what needs to be in there. And specifically, let's just talk about like 4 or 5 things or more to avoid before you put an RFP out so that you don't get sidelined and taken advantage of as you go through the implementation process. So with that said, I know you guys are in the thick of a bunch of ERP implementations. I do a lot of the RFP reviews, so I know what's hitting the streets. And the last 2 or 3 ones have just been inadequate, to say the least. They don't protect the client. They don't protect the project that you're trying to achieve results from. And generally, they're very much in favor of the software vendor. So not only during implementation, but afterwards, you're not going to keep the software vendors accountable for what they've sold you. So what are you guys seeing in the market with your clients?
I think the biggest challenge really is in thinking that you can do it yourself, either the entire thing yourself or a portion of it yourself. If you're talking about something as important as ERP, this is a once-in-a-career project, is what we usually hear from a lot of our customers and people we're talking with. This is you're least optimized for doing something along that size because you've been in the organization for a long period of time. You're probably siloed. Quite a number of reasons why it just doesn't make sense to do it yourself. When you have a team that has been through all the variables, they know all the vendors that are out there, things go a lot smoother. You meet timelines, you meet budget projections. So my biggest thing is thinking that even from the very beginning, we can do this ourselves and sort of figure out what we need along the way. From the get-go, even at the beginning of the discussion, I think you really need to have us on your side to help define what those requirements are.
Or somebody, right? I mean, you can't just do it. If you're a CIO or an IT director, your skill sets are managing infrastructure. You don't necessarily know what the accounting department or the housing department or very specialized agencies that we work with, you don't know what they need on a day-to-day basis. For example, one of the RFPs we saw recently had a 1-line requirement for accounts payable. Like, accounts payable is a huge task.
It's not going to get the job done
within a financial system. And how many sub requirements can you come up with just right now in accounts payables, right?
Yes, hundreds.
Hundreds. I mean, when we do requirements, it's at least a 3,000 line item per module, even sometimes, document. So to have seen a 1 line saying accounts payables, especially for a very niche and specialized industry like public housing, that's not going to cut it. And how many different ways can you think of that the client can get screwed on something like that?
Tons.
Yeah.
I mean, multiple. You name a way, and a vendor will do that to you. And that's another reason, I think, piggybacking what Robert said. We've seen these different ways that vendors will, quote unquote, try to pull a fast one over, and we nip it immediately. I think, and that's another reason why us or someone similar to us, just it helps take some of that. What's the word I'm looking for? It helps take some of the pressure off internally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you're right. It's being an advocate for the client, because without an advocate, you're at the mercy of the vendor. The vendor wants to sell you something, and that's all they really care about at the end of the day. They don't care about your specific requirements. They don't care about your long-term goals. They don't care about what the state of your data is. They just want to get you locked into an agreement and sell you a product. And you're not going to have really one on your side advocating for the larger picture of making sure that it's done right. So you're not doing this every 4 or 5 years. An ERP is something you should only do about once every 10 years, ideally, and get that longevity out of the system. The only way you get 10 years out of it is that you do it properly and know exactly what needs to be done from the get-go, get it implemented smoothly, get everyone on the same page, align the stars, so that way the ERP solution is helping you from day one. And you're not going back 2 or 3 years later and trying to modify what you have. Or what we've seen with other vendors where they're just scrapping their ERP system after 3 or 4 years because it never served the original purpose that they purchased it for.
And not only that, but whenever you're going through and developing these requirements, but it's just understanding where you are as an organization and what you actually need. The requirements is not just for a vendor. It's just as much as important internally for your organization on where you're at. We go into meetings many, many times, and person A has no idea what person B does, but their processes interact with one another from one end to the other. And most of the time they have no idea what they do. So it creates a lot of transparency internally for people who have been siloed. But it also helps craft those frameworks for the requirements and being able to move forward to ensure that those processes aren't like that moving forward in the future state. They're well documented, they're in the requirements, and then the vendor also has to take that in account as you move forward and start to actually implement the ERP.
So we want to talk about 4 or 5 things, mistakes to avoid, right? Is number one, releasing an RFP without in-depth requirements? I would say so.
Yes.
I mean, gosh, it's like building a house. How do you give someone a contract without defining what kind of windows you want in them, what kind of flooring you want? How do you even price things out? How do you negotiate on things? Because going back to that example of the one-line accounts payable requirement.
Can you really define your AP operations in one line?
No, and can the vendor price it effectively so that when you do get into the implementation process and the vendor says, or you at that point start going into what your process looks like and what it should look like, here's your change order, right?
Yeah.
Now that you've signed the contract, you're on the hook. The only way you're going to get through this is if you pay the vendor another $100,000, let's say. So it's critical to do that homework up front, right? Number one then is do your homework, do the requirements right, so that you can do your implementation effectively and it becomes your contract compliance tool as you go through the implementation and beyond.
There's an internal purpose that Ross and I were just talking about that it also serves. That is your last and best chance to get consensus internally as to what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. By putting together those requirements in detail and getting your organization to understand this is what we're looking for. So, if there's something that's not on there that needs to be on there, speak now or forever hold your peace. Otherwise, without that, you're not going to get consensus internally. And those set of requirements, however bad or good they might be, were probably only done by 1 or 2 people, not in a group setting, not by a careful analysis of what it is. So it serves more than just the vendor purpose. It's getting your organization ready and all on the same page for what's about to come, and making sure that is as easy as possible to navigate.
Robert, you mentioned something earlier too about going through right, and then if it's not done correctly, scrapping it. Can you imagine after 4 or 5 years this is implemented, and then you're back to working on the same templatized spreadsheets that you used the prior system after spending $1 million on something? Like it's.
And yet, how many times have we seen it in the past year?
Yeah.
Yeah.
More times, I think, than we would all like to count.
Well, in business process and understanding of your own business processes, when you're a large organization, there is no understanding. There is no body of knowledge that says, here's how we do work. Like you said, Katie, 2 people in the same department are doing things completely differently. So which one's right? Are neither of them right? How do you define how it should be? So the study of business processes and what needs to change needs to happen up front. That's another mistake ERP people that are in the market for ERPs make, especially on the government side, is that haven't thought through how things have been going on in the last 30 years. You can't just take old processes, stick them into a new system, expect them to work. So business process analysis, redesign, rethinking that leads to better requirements is absolutely critical. And another mistake number 2, is not doing that upfront. Examples without naming names of where you've seen things fall apart just because of that.
Well, first of all, you're spending all of this time and investment on implementing a new software system, and we've always done it this way. This is, I don't know why I do it this way. This is how I was told when I came in, and this is how I've always done it. I've been here for 25 years. And, that can't be carried forward in a new software system. And maybe things are reworked in such a way where everything is in the system and there's nothing in an Excel spreadsheet. But you wouldn't be able to know that unless you did your homework, you documented your current state, and you were able to move forward. And not only documenting your current state, but being able to take that and translating it to the future state and who is involved in those processes. What does that look like in a modern ERP? What is even possible in a modern ERP? And I think that is a critical piece of documenting those items so that it's not only transparent as an organization as a whole, but to functional areas for those people who have always done it this way for 25 years. Letting them know how their roles are changing, how this would work in a modern ERP. And that's a big change management piece too, which is critical. But
yeah, that's a good important point. The messaging on ERPs is critical because a lot of people will see this as a threat to what they do, either because they feel insecure about the process that they're using, or just for the fear that something's going to change their job drastically. They won't be able to keep up or threaten what they do. And especially if you happen to have labor unions internally, you have to be very, very careful with how you structure this ERP and know what your boundaries are on doing those things. And again, the vendor's going to make all sorts of promises that this can be done, or this can wait till after go live, and this can be changed later. It's a very painful process. And the change management has to occur before your go live, because once you're back to your full-time job and you finish an ERP implementation, no one ever goes back and revisits these things. No one ever goes back and looks at their business processes. No one goes back to look at their data, which I think is another important point of a major mistake, is not knowing the state of your data going into something like this.
Well, and how much is that system agnostic, right? All of these things don't rely on what system you're going to buy. Yeah. A good point to make, Katie, was how do these people, these well-meaning, hardworking people that have been working on the same system for 30 years, that haven't had the time to pick their head up and see what's out there. There's some people that get to go to conferences, and others have some time to look at YouTube. But when you ask our clientele, how do you want this to be better? There's times where there are no ideas or answers because they don't know, and it's not their fault. So again, going back to whoever it is that's putting out an RFP saying, I can handle this on my own, how intricate is your knowledge of business processes, and how well can you educate people on what's out there, what's new and exciting? And do you have the time? Do you have a day job, Mr. or Miss CIO? Like, this is a once in a career opportunity to make things better for your organization. You can't wing it.
And how well do you know your organization?
How well do you know? Yeah.
From a process standpoint.
Exactly. Brings me to the example, an unnamed city in California released an RFP, and then they canceled it. They re-released it. They canceled it. A new CIO comes on board and says, we're going to scrap the whole thing. It was for business process redesign. They were trying to do this right. New CIO says, we're just going to go out and buy software because our neighboring city did the same thing and they know all about it. Huge mistake number 3. Don't just copy someone else's work. These things are extremely critical to figure out and do on your own for yourself, because no two implementations are the same. Even if it's for a similarly sized city or a county, there always are nuances that can come and bite you in the ass. On the behind. in the
just a
future.
Wednesday here.
We'll have to censor that.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry.
But it's a good point too, because no two finance directors are the same.
Mhm.
No two finance departments are the same. And those are, when you talk about ERP, it usually starts with the finance department. So you're already
Yeah.
dealing with
Mhm.
major differences than what someone else's RFP is going to be
Yeah.
serving.
And within cities, neighboring cities here in Maryville, right?
Mhm.
You've got one city that has full service city, fire, police, utilities, and then there's a city next door that has only one or two of these services. So can you really take requirements from here and apply it there and expect the same results? You really have to dig into business processes that lead to requirements that are ultimately driven by how the city is set up, what the vision is for the council or the city manager or the
Mhm.
mayor, and how you want to deliver these services. And it's even more crucial these days because you said once in 10 years you replace an RFP, ERP. I think with SaaS, if the vendors ever get their acts together, with SaaS, they can have customers for life. This isn't this. Then you're just doing.
And they should, with a good
Right.
quality product and a good implementation, you should have a product for the rest of your career.
Mhm. Yeah. So a lot of advantages to doing ERP implementations today than there were 10 years ago, because now you can be sure if you do this right, it's going to be a once in a career project for the client, the vendor, and consultants like us, right? For that specific client.
And not only when you're talking about, taking someone else's requirements and making it work, but it's also, what state level requirements are there for your organization? What federal requirements are there for your organization? Are you federally funded? How many different types of grants do you bring in? How do you manage those? Are there indirect costs related to all of your accounting and finance? There are multiple things that many different organizations do differently, and trying to fit a square peg in a round hole is definitely not something that we would ever recommend to move forward with.
And housing authorities, one of
Yeah.
our specialties. Each one is different. Depends upon if you're MTW or not.
Exactly.
Your compliance requirements. Are you working with cities to help handle their housing, as well as what's in your region, counties, variety of funding levels, and especially when you get into MTW territory, for those who are PHAs, that the door opens wide for what you want to do, but along with that comes a lot of reporting and compliance that has to be maintained. Every PHA is different. There is no one solution fits all when it comes to PHA and ERP foundational workflow products with them.
Exactly. And reporting, especially
Huge.
in public housing, is critical.
Yeah,
it's
and
huge.
We consistently see with customers who are starved for reporting and dashboarding capabilities. They're doing everything manual process right now. One I can think of we're working with basically just sticks everything into their ERP system and uses it as like a data hold. They don't get reporting out of it. They don't do any dashboarding, slicing and dicing. They don't go to it to make decisions. Well, the whole point of an ERP is one-stop shopping on all your decisions, your data-driven decisions for your organization.
And that kind of takes it to the data point that you brought up earlier is, knowing where your data is. What does your data integrity look like? How do you maintain it? Where does your data live? Is it in an ERP that you just go and pull stuff out of and then manipulate it in Excel? What is your source of truth? What is your book of record? Knowing all of that, knowing where this data lives prior to moving forward with an ERP will help you drastically along the way, understanding what needs to be done. Or if you need a partner to help you manipulate and find and clean and standardize and scrub, whatever you want to call it, helping you go through those steps together and help you understand where you are from a data perspective, because that 9 out of 10 times is one of the longest and hardest pieces of an implementation is converting that data, understanding what you actually need to bring over, what you don't need to bring over, and setting those requirements and standards as you move forward with the implementation.
So I think that's mistake number 5 is not, or 4, I don't know. It's a major mistake though to underestimate or overestimate how much data you need.
Yeah.
Right. the best practice these days, especially in small government, is to bring over 3 years of balance data, like general ledger data, and then maybe 1 year of transactional data. And you don't really need an incoming vendor to tell you what that is, because that leads to an upsell, right? An unscrupulous vendor will say, bring everything, here's the bill for it, and then not get it done, because extracting data out of old AS400 systems and massaging it to fit a newer system it's going to take not just the vendor's time, but also your staff that's already overburdened with their day job and this project. So think about what you need the old data for. Can you keep archived data in an archival system with easy access to just the numbers when you need it? Like, why do you really need 20-year-old transactional data for payables or payroll? You might need it for, I don't know, God forbid, some lawsuits or something like that. But on a day-to-day basis, you just maybe need 2 years of data to go back and look into.
Yeah, I think with almost every example I can think of, customers tend to keep too much data, or at least not define what they're going to do with it. So they decide at the end of the day, I'm just going to import all of it. And that's an unneeded expense. That's something you just don't need to do, and would be a tremendous waste of resources and money.
Yeah. And, you have, when you don't think it through, you tend to get told by the incoming vendor that we can do it all. Meanwhile, the outgoing vendor, if you have data on your premises and your servers, you're not going to get support from a vendor you're saying goodbye to. So really have to think this through. Put it in an RFP. It should be part of your requirements, right? How are you going to convert data? And then you pick vendors based on all of these requirements, based on demo scripts and demos and reference checks. Then you can really negotiate based on requirements you put in there. But again, one line requirement is going to cut it, because the vendors can say, of course we do payables.
Yeah.
Done.
Oh, and that's one thing that you brought up that we haven't even broached that subject yet, and that's your demo and your script, and laying out exactly step by step what you want to see. This is your time. It's all of your department's times to see what exactly is going to be an AP or an AR process.
That's a great point.
And I mean, that should be taken directly from your requirements, from your standard day-to-day business processes. And you say that you can do this, you say you can handle it, show it to us.
Yeah.
It is incredibly difficult to hold the vendor accountable after the fact. If you don't have that defined in the first place, your legal department's going to look at a dispute you have and say, you didn't define this, or you didn't clearly state this. They're not in breach of their contract, and you're going to be stuck either with a module that you don't like, don't need, doesn't work with you, or a vendor who just doesn't really care about addressing your needs going forward. So doing the work up front on the procurement side and making sure that document is done correctly, and I'm speaking from 16 years in local government, saves you tremendous amount of pain in the long run.
So I think we've covered 5 mistakes. Recently we've seen a client that did everything right, that was then able to use the requirements and contractual language to push back on a vendor and say, you lied on your response to our RFP, right? In the absence of that detail of an RFP and a requirement set, they would have been dead in the water, because there was no way to prove that what the vendor promised they couldn't deliver. Talk a little bit about that experience, because we were holding the client's hand through the whole process, and we were able to show that, look, this what the vendor's delivering is in the realm of what you're asking for, but it's not the complete set of requirements that they agreed to. And in the absence of such well-defined requirements, the vendor could have easily said, it does AP, you asked for AP, but does it do AP, and does it, charge labor hours to the work order by grant, by client? That was the crux of the issue, right?
And they would have been stuck.
Yeah.
They would have just been completely stuck. So without those detailed requirements, there would have been absolutely no way. And because they were detailed enough to be able to get into some of those meetings and really understand what was needed from a current state perspective, because they had processes documented, because they had detailed requirements, being able to put that in front of a vendor and say, this was your response to our requirements. This is our current process. This is all of the documentation. Can you do this?
Yeah.
And if you can't, we can't move forward.
Yeah.
And a lot of it too is knowing from day one when we were on that project of almost every meeting, pushing those requirements, not letting the vendor get off the hook, because the vendor strategy seems to be they want to wear you down at some point and get you to just give up and go, I don't want to pursue this, or I don't want to jeopardize the project itself. So I think a lot of you would be surprised that you actually have that option. It's pretty drastic, but if you're simply not going to get the solution that you need for something very critical, you don't have to go with that product. There is a way out. It rarely happens, but it is possible. So if you're looking at your large organization, you're looking at investing 20, 30, $40 million into an ERP replacement. There's a lot of political risk that comes with that as well. Know that by doing a lot of this up front gives you the ability to have an exit strategy like that. Save the time and money that you would have wasted going with a product that was not going to work for you, and be able to go out and seek another product that actually will.
And it's a long-term risk for your organization and for your employees. So it's not just the software that doesn't necessarily fit your needs. It doesn't fit your employees' needs. So that from a perspective of keeping your employees satisfied and helping them be more efficient at their day jobs, it could potentially make it worse.
Yeah.
And why risk that?
Yeah, and we've seen another client, right, that stuck with a broken product for a long time, and the only way to make it work was paying, millions of dollars to third-party experts in that specific product that can own. Those are the only people that can make this work for you. So every time you need a specialized report, here comes an invoice that goes along with it.
Yeah.
Right? Because you didn't do the homework up front, or you didn't change with the times and stuck to a product, what I call foolish consistency. We've made this decision 10 years ago, so we need to stick with it. The odds are in your favor if you do the homework, stick to the requirements, use that as a compliance tool, hold the vendor accountable, and don't pay upfront fees. I think this is mistake number 6, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Once you sign on the dotted line, the vendor is going to send you a contract and an invoice that says pay upfront for SaaS fees. And the usual excuses are, well, we have to set up the cloud for you. No, it's already there. You don't have to pay for anything that you haven't started using. There may be some negotiating points there. For example, you might have to negotiate on that, right? Pay quarterly. Keep the balance of payments and the leverage in your favor always. Clients that pay upfront, we've seen that the project team suddenly goes away, they get sick, they've got other projects to handle. And you don't have any leverage to hold these vendors accountable, large and small. This isn't, we're not pointing at a particular vendor, but all of them seem to be doing it.
Yeah, and I think if we have the best in mind with some vendors, we have some vendors we work with, we see a fairly consistent pattern of some troubling things, to be honest. But others, I think they're just so busy. We talk to project managers at vendors that are managing 7 or 8 implementations. They really shouldn't be. It's very difficult to get really good customer care when you're managing 7 or 8 different implementations. But if they know that they can just get away with not addressing your requirements or doing a lot of the relationship building that should be with you, they're not going to waste their time to do it. They're going to move on. They have other things to do. So making sure that you insist from the beginning that you're going to have a working relationship with them, that you know what the go live team is. Don't allow them to suddenly switch the go live team on you out of the middle of nowhere. And now you're going live with folks that don't know the particulars about your particular setup and what you went through. Let us be the advocates for that. That's what we're very good at. We've seen quite a variety of things. And we've seen some incredible challenges that otherwise would have prevented a go live.
Yeah.
We got the customer through and kept them on track and on time.
Well, speaking of go live, another mistake, add that to the list.
Don't
Don't pick a date. Don't agree to the first date that comes out of the vendor's mouth or email, right? They'll say arbitrarily, our project plan says July 1. Does that work for you? Do you have external deadlines? Is that even your fiscal year? How do you transition and how do you sequence go live? You also need to define what go live means to you. Is it when all modules go live? Is it when you can cut the first check? Is it when payroll goes live? What is go live? It's something that you have to define up front and maybe even put that in your RFP so that it becomes part of the contract language. Is go live is when all of our testing is complete to our satisfaction, when we can run test scripts to our satisfaction, and everybody's ready from the change management perspective to take on a new project or a new system.
Oh, and even to piggyback kind of on the previous point, I know that this is starting to get a little bit into vendor management, but it's still relevant.
Yep.
Between what Robert mentioned and what you mentioned about paying the invoice, you mentioned about not letting them change the team. Do not start a project until you get a roster and until you get a project plan.
Project plan.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
holy cow.
Project management 101, right? I mean,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
We've seen that way too many times to be okay with.
Yeah.
My goodness.
Kickoff meeting and the software vendor shows up with no project plan. And we've seen them show a sample. We've seen them show other clients' project plans and say, this is what it's going to look like. Like, no, how are we supposed to, as a client, plan and prepare and communicate to our staff if there is no project plan? Very common mistake.
And to piggyback off of that, we could go all day here.
Yeah.
But to piggyback off of that, it's the communication about the project internally. Whether it's, emails, videos, meetings, whatever that is, not being able to get a hold of your project manager, not having a project plan, all of that keeps you from gaining traction on the project. And so having to constantly go back to your project team and saying, oh, yeah, we didn't get what we were supposed to. We still don't have a project plan. We don't have access to our environments. We don't have this. We don't have that. That's going to create really bad morale. And then you lose buy-in from your team. And so not communicating with your team is a huge no-no when you're working on an ERP project, because if you don't have those boots on the ground users or just even your super users on board for this project, it's not going to be successful because they are not going to own it themselves. They're not going to take in these future state processes that you've mapped or any of the documentation or want to use the system, let alone in their day-to-day jobs. So good point, Ross.
Well, it comes down to, I know we're harping on what the vendor does and how to manage them, but really ERP system software itself does what it's told to do. Projects tend to fall apart when they're badly managed. And it can be from your end because you didn't resource it correctly. It could be more often than not it's from the vendor side because they don't pay close attention. Like you said, Robert, they're overextended, especially in today's labor market. Not an excuse, because when the client signs on the dotted line and agrees to pay for certain things, you expect to receive the services for that. But I want to conclude this by saying that, you're not alone. If you're in the market for an ERP product, if you're in the process of implementing one and are being treated badly by a software vendor, you're not alone, sadly. Because there are other clients in the same boat, but also you're not alone because there exist companies like ours that can really take the bull by the horn. And with our recent knowledge and historical knowledge of vendor management, we know where the bodies are buried, and we have had success calling out small and large ERP vendors on lies and misrepresentations to our clients' benefit. So.
It's important to mention too, reach out and get help no matter what state you are in the ERP. It's starting to sound like we're doing an intervention here, but it really almost is. You're ideally getting someone like us involved at the beginning of the project as early as possible. Even when you're starting to think, you don't know what you're going to want to do, but you're just starting to think about replacing your ERP. But even if you're way down the road, and this must be one of the software vendors calling us right now. Make sure you reach out to someone. If it just doesn't look right, it doesn't feel right, if what we're saying here resonates with you, reach out and get some help on it. There's a way to get in there and hold the vendor accountable and maximize the situation. Don't ever think it's a lost cause. Don't ever think you have to just give up and pay the vendor and accept a system that is substandard.
It's never too late.
Yeah.
It's never too late. It can always be fixed.
You don't have to go live with a crappy solution and be mistreated by a vendor. So with that, we'll conclude this. We'd love to hear your comments and thoughts. Thank you for those that have been commenting, and you'll find this on our socials here pretty soon. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.